But they wouldn't be doing that unless they were comfortable with the alternative. And we're very comfortable with the alternative because there are numerous sources of both nitrate and nitrite. Most of them come from ground sources or plant sources that are grown in the ground.
Welcome to MeatsPad, a platform to share breakthrough knowledge that is accessible to the entire meat industry. Be ready to hear from meat specialists who will talk about numerous topics in meat science, including animal welfare, meat production, meat quality, and so much more.
This podcast is brought to you by the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network, the National Provisioner, UltraSource, the new standard for innovation. Dry Age Pro makes dry aging in-house, flexible, safe, and affordable. The U.S. Meat Export Federation. The mission of USMEF is to increase the value and profitability of the U.S. beef, pork, and lamb industries by enhancing demand for their products in export markets through a dynamic partnership of all stakeholders.
Hello, meat folks. Welcome to the MeatsPad podcast. My name is Francisco Nahar. We continue the conversations with meat specialists, meat scientists, and meat leaders around the globe. Today, it is a privilege to have Dr. Jonathan Campbell. He is an associate professor and extension specialist at Penn State University. And before we start, how are you, Dr. Bass?
I'm excited as usual, Francisco, and great to be here. Dr. Campbell and I go back a couple years, and I'm really excited to have him on the podcast today. Cured meats, which is kind of a specialty of Dr. Campbell's, is a passion of mine. I would almost say an obsession of mine. Some people have hobbies. I have obsessions, and at the moment, I have some bresaola hanging in my pantry down in my basement right now. It's an area that's near and dear to my heart, and so I'm just excited to get the conversation rolling.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. And now, please, Dr. Campbell, tell us about you. Please tell us a little bit about your background so our audience can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in South Carolina before I was shipped to Iowa to master English a little bit better. 20 years ago, I might have had a lot more of an accent from the southeastern part of the United States. More so than I do now. So I grew up in South Carolina. My mother's family was near Asheville, North Carolina. And so I guess my quick introduction to agriculture was from her father. So my maternal grandfather had he was into textiles and also raised Hereford cattle on his farm. And so that was really kind of my background as to getting into to agriculture, as well as I'm the youngest of 6 children. Wow. And I had 4 dads and 3 mothers growing up, which probably tells a little bit about my rebellious spirit, I suppose. Having that education from having all those people that, were kind of looking out for me as I was growing up was also neat because I learned different passions and growing up hunting and fishing in the Southeast, I guess is where I really got my start and passion for processing meat because I was always interested in how we did our own venison or if we did a beef on my grandfather's farm. That was always something that interests me. My father was a physician and my mother was a school teacher. So I suppose that's where the science and education for me comes into play. I did my bachelor's work at Clemson University in Clemson, South Carolina in the Department of Animal Science there. I was pre-vet, but luckily for me, I had some great leaders and instructors during that experience. And so one of the first courses I took as part of that pre-vet curriculum was a basic meat science course. And I had the opportunity to have Dr. George Skelly, who's an Oklahoma native, but did his PhD work at University of Kentucky, he was kind of the country ham expert in his day. And that was really what not only excited me about the meat industry specifically, but also meat processing. So I started working as an undergrad employee in the meat lab at Clemson. When I graduated with my bachelor's degree in 2000, I got the opportunity to apply for the meat lab manager position there because the individual who had been the meat lab manager position, he stepped down, and so that opportunity was afforded to me. And Francisco, actually, one of your colleagues at K-State, Dr. Kelly Getty, was instrumental in hiring me in that position. So she did a brief stint at Clemson before moving back to Kansas. And so that was a fantastic opportunity. And for me, I really had no interest in going to graduate school. I had had enough of school. It wasn't something that was on my radar, but I was approached by some livestock producer groups that they asked me to help them do a research project. And it was something that really interested me. And luckily like I said, I had some great individuals while I was at Clemson to say, you just did the hardest part of a master's. Why don't you just take the coursework as well? So I kind of did it backwards, which I suppose is fitting for me. I did the research and then decided to actually formally go to grad school. So I did my master's work at Clemson as well, part-time while I worked full-time. And for any listeners out there wanting to do that, I don't recommend it. It's a little difficult to do great at any one of those two things, at least from a time consumption standpoint. However, it was a great opportunity for me. I was used to having an income, being a staff member there at the university, and to be able to work on my master's degree for free was really just a no-brainer. So I was really appreciative of those opportunities. In 2006, I got to go to the American Association of Meat Processors annual convention in San Diego, California, and met up with my former mentor and boss, Dr. Joe Cordray at Iowa State. And I had never really spent much time in the Midwest. So I had to get my Google Maps app. We didn't have that back in the day, but nowadays I had to figure out where in the hell Ames, Iowa was. So I flew there. I got the opportunity to work in extension for about 8 years at Iowa State while I worked on my PhD part-time under the guidance of Dr. Cordray as well as Dr. Jim Dixon at Iowa State. And doing 30 to 40 extension programs a year for the meat industry really gave me that passion to help all sizes of meat processors. We worked with the largest of meat processing companies as well as very small 2 to 3 person companies. And the variety and diversity of individuals we got to work with was a wonderful experience for me and really propelled me in 2013 when I took an assistant professor position and extension meat specialist position here at Penn State. So that's really my background and my whole story. And I wouldn't change it for the world because most people that start a assistant professor position are much younger than I was when I started. But the experiences I had along the way with my full-time work managing a meat processing facility at the meat lab and also working in extension really helped me to focus my area in what I wanted to do to help meat processors here in the Northeast.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Thank you for sharing that. And I do appreciate the time and effort you put into this. I think there's a lot of value in helping very small and mid-sized meat processors. And I think this is good. What we do to try to educate and just put this information out there, I think this is awesome. Now let's talk about today's topic. Please set the stage. Please tell us about the importance of curing, and maybe we can talk about sodium nitrite and nitrate, and the application of those.
Great. So, curing was really the original preservation method. So one of my pet peeves is seeing a meat product, and if you want to get real confused really fast, look at a lot of the processed meats and all of the claims and labels that are on meat products today. It's really not shouldn't be surprising to us that a lot of consumers can be confused by really the whole situation that we as an industry have created ourselves. Nonetheless, I understand the need to create a specific niche and allow yourself to stand out in a huge variety of products available to consumers. So really it was nitrates and nitrites were discovered almost by accident. If you think back to antiquity and the times of using unpurified salts primarily to, quote, dry cure products. And when I say dry cure, I mean without addition of water, which is common in a lot of the curing techniques that are used in the 21st century. So we use water as a way to disperse some of those what we call non-meat ingredients, salt, sugars, other flavors that may be part of a solution into and infused into that meat product. And so dry curing was a way to simply add salt to the surface of meat products and via osmosis really pull a lot of those salts and other impurities that may be in those salts, sodium nitrate or sodium nitrite being one of them, or perhaps the potassium salts of nitrate or nitrite, really as an impurity of non-purified, maybe sea salts or mine salts out of the ground. So that's really where that starts, and it really developed as a way to act as a preservation method. So we add purified forms of salt and nitrates and nitrites as a means to create high quality items as well as safe items. And so we really add those nitrates and nitrites for both quality reasons as well as food safety reasons.
Well, and on the lines of food safety, and boy, you boiled down a lot of pretty technical information into a very short time frame. And so I want to pick that apart just a little bit from a scientific perspective. First off, what are some of the specific food safety focuses that we use nitrates and nitrites for? And can you give a little bit of an example of the different forms, the nitrate versus nitrite, and when a processor may use those?
Sure. So that's actually a great question there, Phil. I'll kind of answer them a little separately. I guess we'll go to the structure question first, because the structure kind of leads us into the function of how those may work and interact. So it would not be accurate to say that we would want to use nitrate, which is a nitrogen with 3 oxygens attached to it. One of those oxygens would have a double bond, and nitrate is really more inert than any of the reduced compounds. Not to get into a really in-depth chemistry lesson here, but that's really drives to the importance of the structure of it. So nitrate is a more oxidized version of nitrite. So it would be nitrate would be a nitrogen compound with 3 oxygens attached to it. And again, as I said, it's more inert or stable, if you will, than its counterpart that only has 2 oxygens attached to it, and that would be nitrite. So nitrate really doesn't do much for us in a meat system, except for those products that maybe have a very long curing or drying time. So something like the Brejaula that you mentioned earlier, it would be a dry cured beef item. And so perhaps adding a source of nitrate, a nitrogen with 3 oxygens added to it, would serve as a source as that product undergoes the curing and drying process. For the most part, that could be anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks under refrigeration for the curing phase of that product. And then the drying phase, maybe up to 8 to 10 weeks or longer, depending on the quality and consistency of the texture that you want of the finished product. And that's going to vary depending on who the consumer is, what maybe geographically, what your consumer base is used to. So there's a lot of items that are going to go to maybe the time component. So those are really the structure pieces of that. From a functionality standpoint, that free oxygen that's on there, as we continue to reduce that chemical structure of that down, basically we're losing oxygens in the process. And when we get all the way down to, in that chemical reaction, we get down to basically a nitrogen and an oxygen, which is nitric oxide. And that in that form, that nitric oxide readily attaches to the color component of meat. So once that occurs in the myoglobin of that product, that readily attaches to there, and then we can fix that color component of the meat product with heat. So if we're making a ham, one of the holiday seasons is coming up. If we're making a ham for that particular holiday, once we cook that ham, and that heat product actually helps to fix that, what we call cured meat color of that product. From the safety standpoint, as that nitrite as that nitric oxide or nitrogen with 1 oxygen molecule, it becomes a component of that meat product, albeit a very small component of the meat product. It is really powerful in combination with salt to combat some specific food pathogens that we may be concerned about, especially in our heat treated meat items, specifically Clostridium botulinum, which is responsible for causing botulism, food poisoning, and Clostridium perfringens. So our 2 Clostridio species that we are worried about causing very potent neurotoxin food poisoning or intoxications. Nitrite serves as a function to be able to combat those. It inhibits Clostridium botulinum almost 100% of the time, and as not quite as efficiently Clostridium perfringens, but close, very, very close. And then it would also have a lot of impact on inhibiting other foodborne pathogens of concern in those ready to eat meat items. For example, Listeria monocytogenes, which would be one of our major foodborne illness concerns in those RTE meat products.
So so we have our sodium nitrate, which was the kind of the long cure agent that would be brought about for your maybe large whole muscle and large diameter old world salumi.
Correct.
You have your sodium nitrite, and that's going to be maybe the smaller salami items and your quick cure situations, like a cooked ham, like you mentioned. The holiday season is coming in, right. And so the two main agents. Can you give a couple of the names that you may see some of these? Because there's a number associated with each one of those. Is that right? Like is it cure number 1 and cure number 2?
Yeah, and I don't like those terms. Those are more culinary terms.
Okay.
The reason I don't like them is it can be confusing for meat processors specifically to comply appropriately with the restricted amounts of those nitrate versus nitrite, or the combination if you're using both, because there may be some products, like you mentioned, Phil, in some of the longer term, you may have some immediate color, I guess, quality attributes that are going to occur. And then have nitrate also in our formulation to serve as a pool that as that product goes through the long-term curing and drying process, you can now have a source to have continuous, I guess, input of a source for nitrite from the nitrate molecule. So having said that, cure number 1, cure number 2, Prague powder, all of these would be specific trade names, and so a common curing salt is a more appropriate term for what these are. Would be 6.25% sodium nitrite and 93.75% salt or sodium chloride. So that would be one type or a number associated with that. And again, the reason I don't like the terms cure number 1 versus cure number 2 is because depending on which source of information you are looking, or who the company is that maybe has a proprietary blend on what they're calling cure number 2, perhaps it's not 6.25%. Maybe they have a different percentage. So I always just use the term curing salt, unless I'm using the purified version of the ingredient, whether it's a potassium or sodium salt of nitrate or nitrite. Unless I'm using the purified version, I would just refer to it as a curing salt and list specifically what the percentages of those are. And the reason for doing that is when you need to justify the fact that you're within restricted limits set by USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service, and we're going on almost 100 years since that regulation was put into place. I believe it was in the mid to late 1920s that the regulations surrounding the use of nitrates and nitrites was regulated. You now have good numbers and percentages to be able to verify with USDA that your calculations are within restricted limits set forth by the regulations.
Well, you bring up excellent points, and I'm really glad you clarified that, actually, because as small processors and large processors that are out there, it is very important to stay within the set parameters and the legalities that are associated with cured meats. And I really appreciate the points that you made there, because yes, I've encountered that in my own passion, as I've mentioned, of the dry curing that I like to do, and depending on the source of some of your cure salts, as you've mentioned, you may get different percentages. And so it's very, very important for the listeners out there who have interest in the cured meats products to definitely look at that ingredient statement, at the label, to see what is the percent of the curing agent that's going to be found in there. And it will explicitly list out sodium nitrate at X%, sodium nitrite at X%. And in almost all cases, those are going to be in a pink color, but indistinguishable from each other. And so very, very important to read the label. Absolutely.
Yep. And when you talk about resources for meat processors, one of the ones that I commonly work with meat processors on is the USDA put out I guess an outreach is an appropriate term here, to help not only their inspectors, but also meat processors understand how those regulations with good examples. And that's the Processing Inspectors Calculations Handbook. That is a free download through the USDA FSIS. And it's important when you utilize that to make sure that all of the percentages are in decimal form. So if you're putting 6.25% nitrite, that it is 0.0625, not as the whole number, as we like to write in percentages. So we put into decimals, and then also that all of your units match, and you don't have grams or ounces of an ingredient with pounds of meat or kilograms of meat with grams or ounces. It just doesn't work that way. So you need to make sure that all of your units are the same and that all percentages are in the decimal form. Good discussion there.
Well, and I'm so glad you made reference to the USDA handbook, and man, what an amazing resource that thing is. For those folks who haven't looked at it, please do. But do be prepared, as Dr. Campbell's mentioning, there's a lot of math involved, and very important to maintain the units. You know, if you're in metric, make sure it's all kilograms and grams, and if you're in empirical units, make sure they're all pounds and ounces. Of course, try to bring a scientist into the conversation, and they can help you with those calculations to make sure that you're within the correct parameters for the product you're trying to make.
And now, a little break.
Since 1883, Ultrasource has been a trusted supplier to the food industry. Ultrasource provides superior kill floor, processing, packaging, and labeling equipment and operational supplies.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Campbell. And now, I think generally, sometimes we find some misconception. We see it at the consumer level, but also sometimes at the processor level. When we're talking about these alternatives, these natural sources of nitrite and nitrate, and please tell us about your take on this.
Yeah, that's a good point, Francisco. I think the growth in removing some of these items, which can be quite dangerous as an industry move, although that seems to be the direction that a lot of the industry is moving towards. But they wouldn't be doing that unless they were comfortable with the alternative. And we're very comfortable with the alternative because there are numerous sources of both nitrate and nitrite. Most of them come from ground sources or plant sources that are grown in the ground. Because most of our dietary vegetables that we take in the form of green leafy vegetables or something that grows in the ground. It doesn't necessarily have to be a green leafy vegetable, although that is a common source of nitrate, dietary nitrates, and really is a common, cycle that we have in our human diets. So we get much more dietary nitrates and nitrites from the plants that we eat than the processed meats that we consume. Having said that, basically having a source like celery or beets that have very high levels of naturally occurring nitrates in them to begin with, you could utilize a natural source like that and go ahead and pre-convert that nitrate, which is generally done through some sort of reduction through bacterial fermentation. That's probably the best example I know how to give here, where we're actually reducing that nitrate, the nitrogen with 3 oxygens to a nitrogen with 2 oxygens, and then utilizing that as a replacement for purified sodium nitrite or the curing salts that we just discussed earlier. And then we're still able to label that product as natural or uncured. And it would have a very similar safety and quality attributes that we have come to be accustomed to with the products that basically would have been cured from the more purified sources or the curing salts.
Then as a follow-up, please tell us about the concentration of nitrite in the end product.
So basically, if I understand your question, you're really asking is there more residual in the meat product? Is that, and do I understand your question correctly?
Yeah.
And the answer is, it depends. It depends on what the ingoing amount was, because with how advanced we've gotten with the natural sources of nitrate, I can almost put the exact same amount of parts per million nitrite into, let's use a cooked sausage as an example. In a cooked and smoked sausage, I can put almost the exact same parts per million with either source. And then as long as I have a source of a good reducing agent and antioxidant, usually in the form of something like ascorbic acid or vitamin C. Sometimes you will see the erythorbic acid derivatives of this, sodium erythorbate, which is another discussion we can have, because there's some misnomers associated with that ingredient as well. But really, these substances act to accelerate that chemical reaction that causes what we know of as cured meat flavor, which is hard to describe from a flavor standpoint, but the color and the safety that we expect out of items that are traditionally cured with these. So the differences would be quite minimal. But keep in mind, in many instances, we can be far below what that restricted maximum level we're allowed to put in, and still get an amazing similarities in what the colors are. And if we're using some sort of reducing agent, or the product is undergoing fermentation where the pH of that meat product is going to drop, for instance, like some of the salamis that Phil mentioned earlier, if the pH is below, say, 5.0, that the pH alone allows for a more reducing environment, so that we can utilize all of the nitrite that is available, so that there's almost no residual left in that product if we were to test that product.
It's interesting. You've mentioned the vegetable sources of nitrates, nitrites, and I agree 100% with you, Dr. Campbell, about it all depends, right? It all depends on what the source is, where it's coming from. I also agree that they have come a long way with some of these quote unquote natural nitrate and nitrite sources. I would say in the early days, and really the early days weren't that long ago, but the early days when these items were really starting to come on the scene, there was quite a bit of question as to how much do you use, how pure of a form it is. And it's probably the reason why I'm still a firm believer in using the traditional methods of getting the cure salts, the sodium nitrite or sodium nitrate if I'm doing a long cure. But I do have to admit they've come a long way with some of the vegetable items, and in fact now also have vegetable sourced accelerants as well. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, most of them are not vegetables, but fruit sourced.
Fruit sourced, yeah.
So things like cherry powders, and then there's also fruit sourced replacers for both natural sources of nitrate and nitrite. Perhaps it had some nitrate or nitrite during the early beginnings of that particular product, but a lot of the fruit extracts now that are able to be labeled as salt and fruit extract, or dried vinegar and fruit extract, depending on how they're putting that extract. What is really the vehicle, if you will, to get that extract into the product? And sometimes it's a salt, and sometimes it's maybe a vinegar or other solution. But let's not forget that our water sources are excellent contributors to levels of nitrates and nitrites. Why? Because generally most of our water sources, at least in some way or form or another, maybe more so where I live here in central Pennsylvania, but even our municipal sources of water come from a groundwater source because of the large number of groundwater sources that we have in this area. And that, that's going to come from some sort of rainwater, at least initially, until it gets down to the aquifer. And that's going to, in our area, it's going to go through a lot of different limestone and other types of minerals that may be attached to that. And nitrate is one of those, components of regular groundwater. And so it is not something that we can just say, oh, we got to get away from this as part of our, part of what we consume into our bodies, because that's just simply, number one, it's not necessary. Number two, there's a lot of good things that come from having a dietary source of nitrate and or nitrite.
Yeah, well, and that's an excellent point as well. I do recall a few years back being involved in some workshops of, you get some of these small processors, and they're true artists. I mean, these guys are absolutely incredible, but they did bring up the points where you have to almost observe and watch even the seasonality. Say if you're on your own well, and even the seasonality of the wet season versus dry season, and the water table that's there, and how that may indeed affect some of the nitrite content that's going into your product, because we do use water as an amazing media for carrying these agents.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And if you're looking for consistency, well water and groundwater is not maybe a great ingredient to consider using in your meat products. You want to either invest in something like a reverse osmosis system, or use just purified water that you'd buy in. So
that's a great point, and maybe something to consider for those who are really thinking about that volume option, and I do know, when we were making hams and bacons, you go through an awful lot of water. And so for those who are on their own individual well, something to consider. Keep in mind that those nitrite levels may change throughout the year. And if you're making it at the same time every year, just the one batch, it's probably not that big of a deal, because you're probably seeing the same groundwater levels, but that can ultimately affect things. So great points. Oh my goodness.
Absolutely.
Cool. And now, Dr. Campbell, we typically have this question for all our guests, and it's just asking about a certain experience that you've gone through that, because I know we have a lot of folks that are at the meat processing level, and they think like meat scientists, they don't make mistakes. So maybe sometimes this can help us to go through some experience that you encountered, that you learn from it, and that may you become a better scientist.
They're called growth opportunities, aren't they?
I probably do that more this year than I have in the previous 20. But I guess for me, at least from a student perspective, is I've never treated students as anything less than a scientist, because that's what I'm training them to be. And I although there is a respect divide between a mentor and a mentee, I look to my graduate students specifically, I look to them as my equals, because that's what I'm training them to be. Certainly I am mentoring them, but if I treat them with this great divide of us versus them, I don't think we relay as much from an education perspective to our students, or in the case of extension, to meat processors, by expecting them to always call me Dr. Campbell. Now that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the respect, but I think we get much further with our students and with our clientele when we talk to our folks, as equals, as meat processors. And then from a student's perspective, I'm expecting them to come back to me as a scientist, and not necessarily as I'd rather the students be able to apply information than just regurgitate what I said back to them. because it's going to be their experiences coupled with what little information I could provide them in the short time I was able to have an impact, that they're going to need to take down the road in whatever their career choices are. That's how it was approached to me. I was always treated with respect and as an equal. Certainly, I knew that there was a hierarchical difference there, but that doesn't mean that we can't treat not only our meat processors that we're trying to educate and work with. We can learn just as much from them as they can from us, and I think we've got to have that symbiotic relationship not only with our students but also with our extension clientele.
Well, I'm going to brag a little bit on Dr. Campbell, but Asheville, North Carolina is a beautiful, beautiful place, but Pennsylvania is much better having you there. And thank you for all you do for the small meat processors, medium meat processors, and now the entire meat community that's listening in right now. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Same to you.
Well, thank you a lot, Dr. Campbell, for being here today. I think this information is very valuable, and I think a lot of folks out there that will benefit from this. And I hope that we see you soon, and thank you a lot for your time.
Thanks, guys. You have a great afternoon.
You too.
With that, we end this episode. Thank you a lot for listening. If you'd like to receive notifications on the new releases and the new episodes, please subscribe at www.MeatsPad.com. If you're a small and mid-sized meat processor and you have concerns or questions about a certain topic related to meat science and meat processing, please email us at info@meatspad.com. Thank you.